If you can hear noises, Josh is behind the camera drinking cider and playing something, I guess. Are you playing Dark Souls, sweetie?
No, I've had enough Dark Souls for one day.
What you playing?
I haven't decided yet.
Are you going to play that one where the people are the size of mountains?
Oh, Attila. Maybe, actually.
Well, there we go. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel and the first part in my follow-up to my Rag Dolly review. If you haven't seen my Rag Dolly review, I will put a link in the description and a card somewhere up there, who knows? I forget and it's quite late now and I just want to get this video done and out to you guys. Thank you for your patience. If you've seen my Rag Dolly review, then you will know that in researching to get the background on that show, I was like, so many things. I have so many thoughts. I have so many questions. So in the next 2 Rag Dolly videos, I'm going to be going over the history of Rag Dolly, what happened, how things went down, and my thoughts in how the events in the history of the making of this show may have contributed to its weaknesses and its flaws. So if you're down for that, keep on watching. Before we get started on that, show of the week is obviously Rag Dolly. I mean, it was the show of the week on my review, but it seems weird to not make Rag Dolly the show of the week when it's the show we're discussing. So we're just gonna do it again, guys. If you haven't checked out the show or the cast recording, then links will be in the description so you can check it out and check out this show for yourself. Ow, I just stabbed myself in the hand with my thumbnail. Ow. Also, tangent, why are thumbnails as in like YouTube thumbnails called thumbnails? Because they're not like an actual thumbnail. That's interesting. Is it because they used to be the size of a thumbnail? Or is it like on old-timey computers it would be about the size of a thumbnail? I don't know. I could Google it, but I'm not going to. Wait, I'm actually going to Google it. Hang on. Editing me, just put a few moments later over this bit. It's fine.
A few moments later.
Oh no, it comes up as a Wikipedia page. Oh my god, I was not expecting anything to come up. For the body part, see nail anatomy. Thumbnails are reduced-sized versions of pictures or videos used to help in recognizing and organizing them. Fair enough. Etymology, the word thumbnail is a reference to the human thumbnail and alludes to the small size of an image or picture. I have no idea on my frame, so I'm just reading this. Comparable to the size of a human thumbnail, whilst the earliest use of the word in this sense dates back to the 17th century, the American Heritage Dictionary of Idioms is important to have documented that the expression first appears in the mid-19th century to refer to a drawing the size of a thumbnail. The word was then used figuratively, in both noun and adjective form, to refer to anything small or concise, such as a biographical essay. The use of the word thumbnail in the specific context of computer images as a small graphic representation, as of a larger graphic, a page layout, etc., appears to have been first used in the 1980s. New facts with Michaela. Wow, I had no idea that was a thing. I love that. Anyway, now we've learnt where thumbnails come from. As I said, this video is going to be a part 1 to a 2-part extension about the history of Rag Dolly. So today we're going to be going from the inception of Rag Dolly as something other than a book series and a toy up to just before Moscow. If you already know this kind of history of Rag Dolly, you'll know where Moscow comes into it, but no spoilers for anyone else. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about. Hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. So let's start with the prologue, if you will, to Rag Dolly. Rag Dolly was obviously a book series. I'm not going to get into how the book series started. We will literally be here all day. As a book series, it was ripe for adaptation, and 2 producers wanted to adapt it. These producers specifically were looking for an intellectual property, preferably a book series, to adapt for a TV special. They had just come off their adaptation of The Littlest Prince, which I believe was on the Hallmark Channel, and they were looking for their next project after that one was so successful. And in their preliminary discussions of what they wanted to do next, Rag Dolly came up and they thought, we'll run with it. So they got the rights to the character from Bob's Mirror, who was the publisher in Indianapolis based, who owned the rights to the Rag Dolly character and books. And development began on a script written by Patricia Thackeray, one of many Patricias in this story, who had worked on The Littlest Prince with them. She got started on the script. Just to orientate us in time, this is like the late 60s, early 70s. So in 1974, these producers are at a shindig. Apparently it was a roast for someone. Yeah, it was a roast for Johnny Carson. I don't know who Johnny Carson is. But anyway, these producers were at his roast and they end up meeting and chatting to Joe Reposo. He's written the music for Sesame Street. Everyone loves a bit of Joe Reposo. They get chatting and they tell Joe about their idea to adapt Raggedy Ann into a TV special. Joe loves the idea. He's inspired, he loves it, it's great. So he goes off and writes 25 songs for potential inclusion in this special. Producers and I guess Patricia, the OG Patricia, love it. He's on the project. But as the project develops, the team start thinking about whether they want to make a feature film instead of a mere TV special. Put it in cinemas, everyone will love it. And Joe is really instrumental in this. He persuades the parent company of Bob's Mural, remember the guys who own the rights to the Raggedy Ann character, he persuades their parent company to come on board as a producer for the film, and he also persuades the animator Richard Williams to direct the feature. And this all goes off without a hitch, because in 1977, Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, opens in cinemas. Unfortunately, 3 days later, a little film called Star Wars opens in cinemas, and that just completely wipes the cinematic floor with Raggedy Ann and Andy. It kind of gets buried into obscurity because of the phenomenon that is the original Star Wars trilogy, which was breaking new ground in cinema at the time, especially when it came to special effects, and everyone kind of forgot about Raggedy Ann and Andy. Side note, if you want to know what happened to Raggedy Ann and Andy, in 1981, Patricia Thackeray actually adapts the screenplay for Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure into a play script, not related to Rag Dolly at all, but a play script that is still available to purchase the rights for amateur and school productions. So if you know some young people or an amateur dramatic society in your area that want a play to do, maybe have a look at Raggedy Ann and Andy. But yeah, that's a thing that exists. Little tangent there of Raggedy Ann trivia. So in terms of visual media, that is the first adaptation of the Raggedy Ann stories. After Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure, Joe Reposo then joins the board of the ESIPA. At the time Joe Reposo joins, the producing director of the ESIPA is Patricia Snyder, second Patricia. And Patricia didn't forget about Raggedy Ann and Andy, and she urges Joe Reposo to adapt the film Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure into a musical to be produced by the ESIPA. Aware some people might not know what the ESIPA is. The ESIPA is the Empire State Institute for the Performing Arts, and they had a mandate to produce new American theatre specifically aimed at families. Patricia clearly thinks that Raggedy Ann and Andy would be a great fit, so Joe Reposo goes about adapting the film into a stage musical. The stage musical that appears from this is often called the circus cut because of the plot. It was a workshop piece written by Tim Mason, who went on to write How the Grinch Stole Christmas in 1998, which I didn't know existed until researching this video. I thought the only Dr. Seuss musical was Seussical. Apparently I was wrong. And the plot of this version of the show was that all of the dolls run away to the circus, hence the circus draft. It closed in December 1983, and everyone on the team was kind of the opinion that it wasn't really working. It wasn't a good script. Not that it was necessarily bad, it just wasn't working on stage, which sometimes happens. So that's all of the preliminaries really to get us up to the Rag Dolly that we know and love today. Let's get into the development of the show. If you remember from 2 seconds ago, the circus cut of a Rag Dolly musical closed in December 1983. Patricia Snyder was able to retain the rights to the Raggedy Ann characters from Bob's Mural on the condition that another stage production would be up and produced by December 1984. So the ESIPA, the whole team, have 1 year to either fix the circus draft or write a brand new musical using the Raggedy Ann characters. As you are probably aware if you know the history of this show, they went with the latter. However, instead of getting Tim Mason back to write a new script, Patricia Snyder invited William Gibson to come and write the script. Now at this point, a lot of the stuff we know about the background of what happened behind the scenes in the development of this musical are from William Gibson's point of view. So it is going to be a bit biased to how he perceived things, but it's the most information that we have. If you don't know William Gibson, he was a Tony Award winning writer by the time he was on this project. He wrote a play called The Miracle Worker. He was a very well-known writer and playwright. Not only that, but he was actually Patricia Snyder's first choice for rewriting the book of a Raggedy Ann musical, but he wasn't very inspired by the original script, or it seems by the general content of the books in general. The thing that caught his attention was when he heard that the writer of the books, Johnny Gruelle, had actually written the books to help comfort his dying daughter. And that's the thing that William Gibson grabbed onto. That was the thing that he thought should obviously be the story. So with this newfound inspiration, in August of 1984, he spends 3 weeks writing a first draft of the script. This is when we get to the first of many dramas in this part of the video, which I'm going to call Drama Episode 1, A New Drama. Yes, I know that it should be Episode 4 because the original Star Wars were 4, 5, 6, but that's just going to confuse people, and I wanted to go with the new Star Wars because that's the one that came out when the film came out. It was all connected, it's fine. The first drama was to do with pay. So Joe Reposo is still on the team to do this new version of Raggedy Ann, and as well as being paid to write whatever new material was needed for this new version, he was still entitled to royalties from the shows that he had already written that were going to be used in the show. This meant that Reposo and Gibson had a pay disparity, which Gibson apparently wasn't too happy with. To resolve this, he asked for a $10,000 advance on his pay, which, you know, you'd think would solve everything, but there was more drama to this bit. The second drama, and actually kind of the main through drama, was creative differences between the two men. Joe Reposo read William Gibson's new script that he wrote in 3 weeks, and he didn't like it, we can assume, because he tried to put off having an in-person meeting with William Gibson. He couldn't put it off inevitably, so eventually the meeting did happen. In this meeting, it became abundantly clear that the new script and the original songs did not gel well, which is not surprising, seeing as Joe Reposo was inspired by the whimsy and everything of the original stories, and Gibson wasn't really into it until we had the whole death angle. They're written for two completely different stories, so they just didn't jive at all. Not only that, Reposo decided to make Gibson aware that Bob's Mirror, remember, the guys who own the rights to Raggedy Ann the character, had first refusal on any script that was written. Gibson apparently wasn't aware of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if that made him a little bit mad. Fourth bit of drama is that after that bombshell's dropped, Bob's Mirror actually approved William Gibson's script. Speculation is that the only reason Joe Reposo mentioned this is either he was hoping that Bob's Mirror wouldn't approve the scripts because it was so radically different to the books and what the film and the original show had been, or that it would put William Gibson off enough to be like, okay, I'm not doing it. But this didn't happen. The script got approved. And from that point, for a substantial amount of time, Joe Reposo was actually actively trying to get William Gibson, according to Gibson, kicked off of the project. He wasn't successful, but I doubt that would have been good for creative fusion or just workplace joy and a good workplace environment. However, eventually Joe Reposo relented and just got on with it. Later, William Gibson became aware of how involved Joe had been from the beginning, but by the time he realized that and was able to have some empathy for where the guy was coming from, it was kind of too late to salvage their relationship, definitely creatively, because bearing in mind, first draft is happening in August. They've got to get the show up in December, so they don't have a lot of time to be having all of this back and forth and bad blood and creative differences. So after all of that drama, the two men still end up working on the show together. But obviously we still have the fundamental problem that the book and the music and lyrics do not gel. So obviously there had to be some edits. The main edits on Gibson's side of things as the book writer were that he had to make space for musical numbers. You can't have a musical without music. But in terms of the plot and the general structure of the story, it survived pretty much intact from his initial idea to production. In terms of Joe Reposo, he had a lot of work to do. From the early meetings, it was decided that 4 songs could be salvaged from the original circus Rag Dolly cut, edit, draft. But of those 8, ultimately only 4 were kept in, and those 4 songs needed major lyric edits. And then on top of that, obviously more songs were needed to be able to fill in for the gaps left by the other songs that were meant to be there but weren't. So Joe Reposo ended up having to do a lot of rewrites and redrafts, as well as writing brand new material and editing that down. This was made more difficult because of the complete difference in tone between Reposo's lyrics and the script, the book, and also what the director, Patricia Birch, was going for. Tonally, they were on completely different pages, and this is especially difficult when you're talking about lyrics, because lyrics, whilst they're a heightened form of text because they tend to rhyme, for example, they need to be in the same tonal world as the book, especially if you've got characters who are speaking in dialogue and then go into song. You need to feel like it's the same person talking. These problems were also exacerbated by the fact that Joe Reposo, according to Gibson, was often late with material. This was partly to do with the fact that he had other projects, he had other stuff to do, but also his heart wasn't really in it anymore. He wasn't enthusiastic, which meant that he was often late with rewrites or with new material. I have some thoughts about this. Firstly, and hindsight is 2020, and it's easy to look back and be like, people should have done this or that. I personally think that if Joe Reposo's heart wasn't in it, he shouldn't have been involved in the reworked Rag Dolly. He should have said either, you know, you just have to get someone else and you can't use my stuff, or if it was happy for them to use his stuff, be like, okay, any songs you want to use, I have to okay any changes a new composer lyricist makes, and I get royalties for it still, but in terms of new material, get someone else who is jiving with this whole idea, because it's just not for me. I can understand why he didn't. I can understand why that would have been hard for him to do. Firstly, he's been involved with Rag Dolly as a thing, as an adaptation, for a really, really long time at this point, and it can be hard to let go of your baby. And secondly, as a member of the board of the ESIPA, he probably feels a massive obligation to not make things even harder for them. Remember, they have to get the new show up in a year. They only get the first draft kind of in the latter half of August. That gives them September, October, November, December. That's 4 months. To find a new composer lyricist who's going to be the absolute perfect fit for this show and get it all together in time for December, I wouldn't be surprised if that would be nigh on impossible. So for Joe, he's probably thinking if they need to find a new composer lyricist, they're not going to get the show up in time, and then they'll lose the rights and all of this work will have been in vain. So I can understand why he didn't. Also, there's the flip side of, if we were in this alternate universe where Joe was like, you know, like Dragon's Den, I'm out, maybe the show would have never made it to Broadway at all. As you will see later, Joe Reposo had a huge part to play in pushing the show to beyond just the ESIPA. He wasn't the only critical player, but he was one of them. So without his participation, maybe no one would have heard of Rag Dolly ever. So it's just something to think about. So they're writing the show, the drama's been and done, everyone's kind of on the same page, sort of, everyone's just trying to get it done. October, we have auditions for the show at the ESIPA. I'm not going to talk through who the whole original cast was, because this is more about the creation of the show rather than casting and performances. But I do want to mention that this is when Ivy Austin gets involved, because she is an integral part of this whole journey. She's been such a strong advocate for Rag Dolly living on in some capacity, even if it's just in the following that it has. So I think it's important to note that this is where she enters the story. She had some prior connections with both Joe Reposo and Patricia Birch, the director, which I think is probably how she got called in to audition for the show. The majority of the rest of the cast were actors hired by the ESIPA. I couldn't find a lot of information on this, but my understanding is that the ESIPA had their own company of actors that they cast from, and then for specific roles they looked outside to other actors not employed by the ESIPA to fill those roles. Ivy Austin was one of those roles. There were a couple of other roles as well who were kind of outside hires. Casting happens in October, and there is a 5-week rehearsal period, which I don't know about like 1980s rehearsal period, but today, at least in the UK, 5 weeks feels kind of generous. I guess especially for a new musical, it would be kind of standard. Something that is subsidized or has a substantial budget, 5 weeks is pretty good. But this is where we get to drama 2, Attack of the Drama. No, the Drama Strikes Back, damn it. I'm getting my OGs and my prequels mixed up. Before we get onto the drama, I just want to also note another thought that I had. I think one important thing to mention here is that with the timing of everything and the fact that no workshop is mentioned, I don't think this version of Rag Dolly was workshopped at all. That might have had something to do with the fact that they had a 5-week rehearsal period as opposed to a 4 or 3-week rehearsal period. I've rehearsed an original musical in 3 weeks. It's doable, but especially as a new American musical and how much pride America as a nation takes in musical theatre, I'm not surprised given the circumstances, but I think this is, again, one of the things that allowed the show to be weaker than it could have been, is the fact that they weren't able to workshop it. It wasn't like they were taking the circus draft and adapting it. It was a brand new story, and they were having to kind of smush together songs from like another idea of what Raggedy Ann should be with this new script of what Raggedy Ann should be, and kind of like just stucking them together like Play-Doh. Stucking isn't a word, just go with it. Hamilton had a 6-year life before Broadway of just workshopping and rehearse readings and workshop performances and out-of-town tryouts and things. Rag Dolly didn't have that. Now obviously this isn't a show that in its inception was like, we're going straight to Broadway, so that might have had something to do with it. But again, I think if they'd been able to have a workshop before putting on the show, I think it would have helped loads. And also, this feeds into drama 2, The Drama Strikes Back. Let's get into it. The first drama is that Patricia Birch, director, didn't allow William Gibson into the rehearsal room on the first day. She wanted it to be just the actors. She was subsequently admonished by Patricia Snyder, producing director, and from that point on, William Gibson was allowed in the room. Again, going back to my lack of workshops, I think Patricia was doing this to protect the actors. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I can only speculate, but from what I've read in my research, Patricia Birch was a very actor-centric director. I also suspect, and again, wasn't there, don't know, that if she was aware that the script was in still quite a raw state, that it hadn't had as much work done to it as scripts usually do, she may have wanted to protect the actors from whatever William Gibson as a writer would be bringing to the room in terms of hearing the material out loud on its feet and then wanting to make all of the changes and being like, no, this needs to be different, this needs to be different, that needs to be different. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I wonder if the probable lack of workshop influenced her decision to want to keep him out the room. I can also understand why he wanted to be in the room. You know, he wants to make sure that what's going on stage he's happy with, especially in terms of the writing, and if he hears stuff that isn't landing right, he probably wants a chance to go and fix it, and he can only do that if he's in the rehearsals and he can see what needs to be fixed. The second bit of drama is that William Gibson felt the staging was, quote, overstuffed. He had conceived of the play with 14 actors and 9 sets, and these sets would be just easy cloth sets that could easily be thrown up and taken down. Very minimal technical stuff going on. that isn't how Patricia Birch wanted to roll. Birch added 9 more actor/stage hands, which she called the Ragettes, who could be part of the ensemble and also allowed them to push and pull more elaborate sets, which is where you get like the fish and the boat and all of the wonderful things that you see in the ESIPA and I'm assuming later Broadway version. As in any rehearsal process, stuff needed to be changed as they went, because that's how rehearsal works, and that's why workshops are so useful, so you can iron out those kinks as much as possible beforehand. But one of the things was that the constantly changing action necessitated redrafts and rewrites of the music, which increased costs because they had to bring Joe Reposo in to be like, can you change this please? One of the things that didn't change, although multiple people wanted it to change, was the design of General D. When William Gibson wrote the character of General D, he'd written in his description of the character that he looked like a rat. And if you've seen the ESIPA version, again, link in the description, they have kind of face, I don't know if prosthetics is the right word, but like whiskers, a long nose, he has a long tail, he's got like little rat ears, I think if I remember rightly. Like, they've really gone in hard with the rat design for General D. Patricia Birch and others were all kind of in agreement that it didn't really work, but William Gibson wouldn't budge on that. He insisted. Interestingly, in later productions of Rag Dolly, that aspect of General D's character design just like slowly gets stripped back until it's hardly there. It's not something that I remember commenting on in my review, but looking back on it now, having like researched for this particular video, it is something that, yeah, it doesn't really have the effect that I think it was designed to have. And I think the issue is all of the other characters have a very clear kind of where they sit on the scale between being humanoid and like not humanoid. General D is kind of on his own as being like a character that is like clearly like supposed to be a rat, but he's not just a rat. He's still kind of human with just like rat qualities to him, and the rat qualities are more pronounced than the other humanoid things with animal qualities like wolf and bat. So yeah, I can see where the rest of the creative team was coming from, but William Gibson didn't want to budge, so I guess that's that. But despite all of the trials and tribulations and dramas and rewrites and rehearsal drama and increasing sets and decreasing want of rat-like characters, the musical that was at that point called Raggedy Ann opened on the 7th of December 1984. I got the date right. They made the deadline, they could keep the rights. I'm sure everyone had copious amounts of champagne. The world premiere of Raggedy Ann ran for a week of previews and a week of performances at the ESIPA. And this is where drama number 3, Return of the Drama, starts. Because the beginning of the life of this musical is just nothing but drama, and I don't know what to tell you. It just is. So let's get into it. However, this drama was not started by anyone involved. Oh no, 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 no. This was started by the original Karen, Ellen Allen, which, like, who are Ellen Allen's parents? Do they just want their child to be a walking tongue twister? I have questions. That's all I'm gonna say. Before we get on to Ellen Allen, it's literally, all you've got to do is scales going Ellen Allen, 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 Ellen Allen. Literally, it's a vocal warm-up. Ellen Allen is a vocal warm-up. Can no one see the irony? But before we get on to vocal warm-up Ellen Allen, I'm very tired, guys, and I've got part 2 to film after this, so just pray for me. That's all I'm asking. Before we get on to Ellen Allen, 2 things that we need to clarify. Firstly, most of the tickets that were reserved for Raggedy Ann were school shows, so school kids going to see the show with their school. The second thing we need to remember / keep in mind is, if you've seen the show, you'll already know this, but the show deals with some dark themes. Themes that you don't usually see in children's theatre. So Ellen Allen was not a fan of this. As the original Karen, you know, a 1980s Karen, she decided to complain about the dark themes in particular. First to Patricia Snyder, but being the proto-Karen, she was like, nah, that's not enough. So she went to local news to complain about the dark themes in Raggedy Ann. Obviously this got around. Albany Public School District was so scared of pearl-clutching parents being like, why are you doing this to our children, that they pulled loads of the tickets that they had booked out. So the audience for Raggedy Ann decreased by a third. This got Patricia Snyder, directing producer, whichever one. She produces the stuff, okay? Patricia Snyder, as a producer, did not like the whole ticket bookings have gone down by a third. If there's one thing you want to do to give a producer a heart attack, just be like, yeah, a third of people have just decided to cancel their tickets. She's freaking out. She goes to William Gibson like, you're the book writer, you've got to make a statement and fix this because, you know, it's for the children. And also, we need to make money, I assume. I don't know how funding works in the US in the 1980s, but I'm assuming she wants to make some money. William Gibson thinks the whole thing is stupid, but, you know, he obliges. Probably not in the most PR-friendly way. He basically says that the parents who are complaining are a danger to their own children. And he says, quote, the style is for children. The content is for me. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I get where William Gibson is coming from. Like, there is a way to take what might traditionally be considered adult themes, dark themes, etc., and frame them in a way that children can understand without melting their tiny little brains. There is absolutely a way to do that. And I agree with his sentiment that, like, he just writes the content he wants to write, and then he writes it in a style for children's theatre. I don't think that's how you reassure a scared populace who's worried that their children are gonna like start devil worshipping or something. I have no idea if that was the allegation. I doubt it was. I'm just being extra because I'm tired. It's kind of like Batman, like it wasn't the response they wanted, but it's what they needed. But also it would have helped if it was the response they needed and wanted. I don't know. So yeah, that happened, but it didn't seem to hurt the show because it still got great reviews, both critically and from people who actually saw it. Again, I wasn't there, but I highly doubt that Ellen Allen actually went to see the show. What I imagine probably happened, or at least what I like to tell myself, is her kid came home and was like, we went to see a show today, mummy. It had a woman killing herself and this girl was dying and someone had to eat her heart. And then the mum freaked out. That's what I think probably happened, but that's just me. This is where we've got to quickly go back to Joe Reposo, because remember I said that he was instrumental in giving the show another life? Joe Reposo actually invited CBS to come and see this production of Rag Dolly with the view of potentially a Broadway transfer. See, when I first heard about this show and how it like only ran for a few performances on Broadway, I was like, well, it must have been like, it did well wherever it like originated, and then a theatre became available on Broadway and people were like, hey, should we take it to Broadway? Sure, let's go. Like, no thought, complete impulse. Because that can happen. But if you know the story, this show doesn't transfer to Broadway for another 2 years. So we're very, very early in its life, and Joe Reposo is already thinking of Broadway. And even though CBS didn't end up like getting in touch at this point to take it further, they were instrumental in the funding of its transfer out of Albany. So yeah, like I said, maybe way back when where there was creative differences, Joe Reposo should have walked away. But if he'd walked away, maybe Rag Dolly would have ended here, who knows. This wasn't the last performance of Rag Dolly in Albany. It reopened on the 25th of October 1985, so about a year later, just under a year later. There were some changes that were made to this production of the show. The two major changes were that one of the songs that was originally meant to be General D's but got given to another character was given back to the character of General D. And a new song, Welcome to LA, was added to the production. Also at this time, a demo recording was presumably / allegedly recorded There is a recording of the show like on the interwebs. Again, I'm gonna link it in the description. It's not known definitively where this recording came from, but I think the general consensus is that it was likely recorded at this point during the time of this production. So like I said, it reopened on the 25th of October 1985 and it ran until the 1st of November. And more importantly, it was considered the dress rehearsal for the production in Moscow. And we're going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Some final thoughts that I didn't write down, but let's just put them out there. I think it's safe to say that this production of Rag Dolly, compared to other musicals, was rushed. I don't think this is necessarily a problem. I think lots of smaller regional theatres, at least that's what we'd call it in the UK, like regional theatres, can have quick writing and production turnarounds for particularly new work. So I don't think that makes it an inherently bad show, and if you saw my review, that was my consensus, that it's not inherently like a bad show. It's a flawed show, but every show is a flawed show. But I do think this rushed beginning didn't stand it in good stead for a Broadway transfer, and I think ideally it would have been good if they were able to plan more for a potential Broadway transfer and get the show into a stronger shape. Maybe they do that in the next video. You're gonna have to watch to find out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. Would love to have you on the channel. Come on down. Come on, you know you want to. Stay tuned for more theatre content from a UK perspective, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye friends!